Αγαπητοί φίλοι και φίλες, καλησπέρα. Έχουν περάσει 10 μήνες ήδη από τότε που αρχίσαμε να μιλάμε για τον ιό COVID-19 και να καταβάλουμε κάθε προσπάθεια για να συνηθίσουμε σε αυτό τον καινούριο τρόπο ζωής. Ζήσαμε δύσκολες στιγμές και ακόμη ζούμε, αφού ο αριθμός των αυξημένων των κρουσμάτων έχουν αυξηθεί και επίσης και οι θανάτοι. Και μάλιστα ετοιμαζόμαστε να μπούμε σε ένα δεύτερο εθνικό lockdown. Σήμερα μαζί μας είναι ο επιστήμονας Dr. Sergis, ο οποίος θα μοιραστεί μαζί μας τις πολύτιμες γνώσεις του για το θέμα του COVID-19. Good evening, Dr. Sergis.
Good evening. Thank you for having me.
Welcome to Hellenic TV, and thank you for willing to share your valuable knowledge with us, especially nowadays. Dr. Sergis, before we go to any further discussion, can you kindly remind us what is COVID-19 virus?
Okay, COVID-19 is a particular strain of coronaviruses. There's a number of, there's four, for example, there's four kinds of seasonal cold viruses, which are coronaviruses. There's four types of the actual cold viruses that afflict people with colds seasonally every year. There's four kinds of those viruses, and they're all types of coronaviruses. Now, this particular one is a fifth. It's a new strain. This is a fifth type of coronavirus, and it has a similar coat, in other words, a similar morphology around it, like the other four, which produce the cold. But this one is a new one, and because it's new, then the majority of the world population is not immunized to it. So this is why it's so dangerous and sometimes, unfortunately, fatal, because it's a new virus that's afflicting us.
So can you tell us in general how viruses infect people? I mean, in general viruses, not specifically COVID-19.
Okay. The viruses in general, what they do is they infect our bodies, and they only thrive, they only live inside other cells. So if you take a virus, and this is the thing why it's different from normal living entities, which are made of cells. Now, viruses are not made of cells, so they cannot live independently. So normal cells can live independently, they can grow, they can thrive by taking nutrition, and they can reproduce independently as long as they take food. But with this particular virus, it can only thrive, it can only live within other cells. So it infects our cells, animal cells or human cells or plant cells. So viruses infect cells, and what they do is they take the actual information inside the nucleus of the cell. So just like the hard disk of a computer, the information is stored on a two-dimensional flat disk in the form of a magnetic field. So it's a two-dimensional informational system on a computer. But in our life, in living systems, the information is stored in a three-dimensional, not two-dimensional, but three-dimensional molecule, which is quite a large molecule called the DNA. That's inside our genes, yeah, that's inside our chromosomes. And there's far more information stored inside our genes. They're inside the flat disk of a computer. So that information, so the virus infects the cell and takes the information from the chromosomes of our nucleus, of our cell, and it, in fact, instructs the cell to make more of its protein. So that the cell, the host cell that it invades, the animal cell that it invades, thinks it's its own proteins that it's making, but it's not. It's making the proteins of the virus. So therefore, it orders the cell to make the viral cells. Instead of making the cell making its own proteins, it makes the viral cells. So basically, it's not like an assembly factory, so that the cell makes more of the virus instead of making its own materials. And then eventually that cell produces many viruses, and then it fractures, and then it carries on. So each cell produces quite a few viruses, and each of those viruses infect other cells.
Mm-hmm. So why is this COVID-19 virus much more dangerous and infectious in comparison to other viruses?
So the reason why it's so dangerous is because we're not immunized to this particular virus. We're not used to it, unlike the normal common cold viruses where we are. And it's still a coronavirus like the other common colds, but it has a specifically different kind of structure. So we're not immunized to it. So it's a very new virus, that's why. And the way our body works, by becoming immune to it, it produces antibodies. And also we have what we call an innate immune system, where we have T cells and other cells like phagocytes, which engulf foreign material like viruses and bacteria. And our body is not adapted to be able to fight this virus because it's quite a new one. Having said that, there is a certain percentage of population that, because it's used to the other coronaviruses, the seasonal cold viruses, and the actual the protein coat of those viruses is similar to this virus. So some of them have some immunity, but not too much. But it also depends on the genetic makeup of the person. So some people are more vulnerable to this virus than others. Some, once they get infected, then after a few weeks they become well and they survive and there's no problem. Some people, however, have major organ failure. So it depends on the genetic makeup of the person, but also it found that on their lifestyle. So people that drink too much and smoke too much or have diabetes are more at risk. And so their immune system goes haywire. So instead of attacking the virus, these people that suffer from other illnesses, instead of actually fighting the virus, they produce their body, if you like, soldiers, which are the antibodies and the T cells. They attack their own bodies. In other words, they have organ failure. So it goes out of control, their immune system. But those people are, if you like, genetically predisposed to the virus, but also they suffer from other conditions. And especially the older you are, especially people over 70, they have more trouble fighting the virus.
So what is the current state of infections from COVID-19, Dr. Sergis?
Okay, so the current state that there's globally since the beginning of this pandemic, since January or late December and January up to October, the end of October this year, there have been 45 million cases of people that have been infected. Of those globally around the world, that's in Europe, Asia, America, and so on. So it's 45 million, almost 45 million people have been infected. And of those, about almost 1.2 million, so about 1,200,000 have sadly died as a result of this virus. And it's quite complicated to make a vaccine because it's found that some people have been reinfected by the virus, so they've survived the first time, and then after that, for some reason, they haven't produced enough immunity, and then they've been infected again. But that's in the minority. In the majority of cases, those people that have survived the virus are immune to it. But in the minority, they've been reinfected again. So it's quite a complicated situation. And it's very difficult trying to make a vaccine for this virus because of the fact that it's so small. It's a bit like the flu virus. It's so small so that it can go through the pores of our lungs. And therefore, it's difficult to try and to synthesize a chemical that can actually fight this virus. And indeed, it's even more difficult to make a vaccine for it, to develop vaccines which is safe and also hasn't got any side effects, and also it has to be effective, and that's why it's so difficult.
So what treatments are currently available for COVID-19, Dr. Sergis?
Okay, so the treatments now are simply just chemical treatments. We're using convalescent plasma, in other words, the plasma of those people, the blood plasma of those people that survived the virus, we're using it to actually to see if we can actually cause them to become immune to the virus. So those people that survived the virus have been asked to donate their blood plasma, and to various degrees that has become effective in immunizing some people. And so that's called convalescent plasma, so the antibodies for other people. And there's been other chemicals, other drugs, like, for example, chloroquine, other drugs like hydroxychloroquine, which has proved effective in different cases. So it's basically, these drugs have various successes. We're looking at other drugs like remdesivir, which was developed and used to treat the Ebola virus, or other therapies involve a combination of anti-HIV medicines, for example, lopinavir, rotenavir, and so other particular medicines are being tried, which have been effective to curing other diseases. And so it's basically, we're looking at all the different, if you like, libraries of chemicals that have been used to effectively treat other diseases. We're trying to use them to try and treat this particular COVID-19 virus, but with various degrees of successes. There's no cure. I have to emphasize that. At the moment, there's no cure for this virus. It's just treatments and just a question of the person's immunity and to fight the virus.
So do you think that they provide different treatment for each patient, Dr. Sergis? I mean,
yes, that's right.
Yes, the medical staff. Do you think they give something different and to each person depending on their immune system, or do they have a treatment for everyone?
Each of us have genetic differently. We're all differently genetically different. Each of us are genetically different, and we all have different genetic predispositions for colds and flus. So some of us can actually quickly recover from colds and flus, and some of us take longer. And it's the same with this virus. It's no different from other viruses. It's just a question of the fact that it's so new and our body hasn't had time to produce enough antibodies and immune cells to fight it. That's why it's so difficult. And like I said, because it's so small, it can get lodged within our lungs. And of course, that's the danger. Once it's inhaled and then goes into our blood from our lungs. And, you know, our body needs time to fight it. But again, we're all different genetically we have all different genetically predispositions to
sure. That's very true. So do you think that the medical staff decides what treatment to give to each patient according to certain tests they do?
That's right.
Yes, okay. Because, I mean, also, do you think early admission at the hospital can help? Because, as you are aware, we had two very important people, like the President of America and also our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. They've been sufferers of COVID. They have admitted early at the hospital. They had the certain treatment, and within few days, they've been out from the hospital, and they are able to act and, you know, live the normal life. So is this a coincidence, or is it a special treatment? You know, how comes the rest of the people cannot also like heal so quickly?
Yeah, what it is that we find that a certain population can recover quite rapidly if they're treated early enough. So, like I said, because we all are genetically different, then we're more susceptible to some viruses and colds than others. So, yeah, so it's important, though, it's paramount that they have early treatment. The quicker the treatment is applied, the more likely the person will recover more speedily. So, yeah, early treatment is impossible.
Yes.
It's important. It's paramount. Early treatment is paramount.
So if NHS admits patients early and they don't tell them stay at home till you're really bad, then they can save lives. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. And that's important. And also, obviously, the earlier they get treated, the less likely those people can obviously be available to infect other people. We have a quantity called the R, which is the reproduction rate, which is the average number of people that each person can infect. So once a person is infected with the virus, with the COVID-19 virus, the R value tells you on average how many other people it can infect. Now, back in June, the R value dropped down to 0.9. This is after the major lockdown we had from March. So in June, the R value was 0.9 to about 0.7, right? So it went down, which was promising. That's why the restrictions were lifted. Now since the end of October, the R value has gone up to 1.1 or around 1.3. What that means is that if it's 1.1, that means for every 10 people that are infected, they can infect 13 others or 11 others. So it's gone up now, which is why obviously it's a major risk. And the pandemic now has really increased a lot. Now we know in France there's a lockdown. Obviously it's happening. It's going to be happening here.
Here as well.
That's right.
So will a vaccine for the virus be available soon, Dr. Sergis?
Well, we hope so, but it's doubtful. From what I know already, a lot of people have asked me, will it be ready before December, by December? Because it's so complicated, because we know that some people, after they become infected, their antibodies have gone down instead of up. So this is a very complex virus we're dealing with. And of course, we have to be careful that the virus is effective and also it doesn't produce any side effects, so it's safe. So we have to, safety and efficacy, that is effectiveness, is important. So we don't want to make the mistake and produce a vaccine that will obviously will result in some people being ill, because that would be a waste of money. Because once the actual vaccine is developed in a university or a research institute, then the next situation is to persuade major companies to invest millions into scaling it up into to many kilograms to have it available to the general public, and that will cost a lot of money. So we're going to make sure it's safe and effective before we do that. So that's going to take a while. We think well after December, possibly January if we're lucky. I doubt we'll be in January, possibly February or March. February or March possibly, but it's going to take longer in December.
Yes, Dr. Sergis, I'm aware that normally it takes about 10 years till a vaccine, we know that it's totally safe with not side effects. So in this occasion, lots of people are really concerned about this vaccination because they feel that it might be dangerous. What is your personal opinion?
No, I don't think, I mean, major companies, pharmaceutical companies have learned their mistakes from the past, that they shouldn't rush before they produce an effective drug. And especially the liable, obviously, court cases that happened in thalidomide, which obviously was they were in a rush to produce the morning sickness pill, thalidomide back in the 60s, of course. You had a major problem where you had mutations, which was tetragenic, that is, produced babies without limbs, etc. So we don't want to go through all that again. So companies have learned their mistakes. So no, nowadays it takes a while before we make sure that everything's absolutely safe. They're not going to rush to market a drug before they know it's safe. So they test it many times. It goes through pre-clinical trials, and then you've got clinical trials where we have only a small number of volunteers, and we monitor the volunteers. Once they take the drug, that we ask them to take a placebo to see if a drug, basically a pill that doesn't have the drug in, so we can compare the effectiveness, and we monitor those people that are volunteered to take the drug or the vaccine, so we can make sure that it's safe before it's available to the public.
So
there's no risk
yes, would you feel comfortable to take it yourself, the vaccine, and your family?
Yeah, I have. In the past, many years ago, I've done lots of research, and I've and at times I run out of volunteers, so I took the drug myself.
Okay, that's very, very brave, Dr. Sergis. So what are the latest discoveries about how the virus infects people?
Okay, so major discoveries have been made in different parts of the world, and a lot of research scientists are trying to find out how this virus infects people so rapidly. And in particular in Japan, latest discoveries in Japan have found that the reason why infection is so rapid is because when just simply talking to people, we produce these micro droplets, which are less than 1/100th of a millimeter in diameter. And these micro droplets, because they're so light, they stay in the air in a room, which we're looking at a normal classroom size room, which stay in the air for up to 20 minutes. And when you sneeze, or when a person sneezes or coughs, then we're looking at droplets which are longer, like a millimeter in length. But because these droplets, when you cough or sneeze, are much longer, they're heavier. So they, after a few minutes, they just simply sink to the floor. However, it's found by shining laser and using computer and lasers and shining at these micro droplets with particular high magnification cameras, we can see these micro droplets, which are exceedingly small, like I said, less than 1/100th of a millimeter in diameter. They stay in the air for 20 minutes after a person sneezes. So all the big droplets, which are a millimeter in length, just fall to the floor, but these just simply float in the air. So the Japanese scientists have discovered this, and they think this is why it's so contagious. But also, if you just talk to people, they found just normal conversations with people, these micro droplets, which are 1/100th of a millimeter in diameter, they can come out of your mouth, and they can the other person who is just a normal distance, like people just talking to each other at a normal distance, and they can just transfer their micro droplets to the other person who inhales them. And because they're so light, they can stay in the atmosphere for 20 minutes. Now, and they advise that the best way to get rid of these is just simply once an hour to open the windows, and they simply just disperse outside. So they can just simply escape into the atmosphere when you open the window. So the advice is open your windows regularly, means once every hour. So just by talking, obviously the louder you talk, the more these come out of your mouth, these micro droplets.
So it's very important to keep our windows open and let the fresh air to come in. Actually, Dr. Sergis, I would like us to see this very interesting video that you have sent us, so for our viewers to see it as well.
Experts are now looking at this new infection mechanism as the key to preventing the further spread of the virus.
ただの会話の中で感染が広がっているとか、ある程度の距離があってもそれが広がっているような、そういった事例を見ると、通常の飛沫感染だけでは説明できない、非常に小さな粒子ということで、マイクロメーターの粒子、マイクロ飛沫感染とも呼べるような、そういった状況が起きたんじゃないかなというふうに考えられます。
So how does this take place? NHK is conducting an experiment with a group of researchers.
はい、レーザーください。
The team will track particles in the air using laser beams and a high-sensitivity camera. This technology allows us to detect droplets as small as 0.1 micrometers wide. The experiment starts. First, sneezing. We can see a large droplet about 1 millimeter in diameter. It quickly falls. But let's look through the high-sensitivity camera. We can see small particles that seem to glitter floating through the air. These particles are all smaller than 10 micrometers, or 1/100th of a millimeter in diameter. Let's take a look from a different angle. They're small and light. You can see them drifting through the air. These are microdroplets. We're learning that sneezing isn't the only source of these droplets. We ran the same experiment on a close-range conversation. People generate a lot of microdroplets when they talk loudly. The droplets between these two stay where they are. They don't drift away. It's not yet known what volume of microdroplets leads to infection. But Tateda says we can't rule out the possibility that microdroplets have spread the virus to some extent.
そのマイクロ飛沫、小さな粒子の中にもたくさんのですね、生きたウイルスがいて、大きな声での会話、あるいは激しい息遣い、そういった中でですね、このマイクロ飛沫ができて、それが近くの人、その人が吸い込むことによって感染が広がる、そういったリスクが見えてきたものと思います。
The risk of infection through microdroplets becomes even greater in a closed space with poor ventilation. This lab is simulating the movement of microdroplets in an airtight room. About 10 people in an enclosed space the size of a classroom. A person coughs once and spreads about 100,000 droplets. Large droplets are shown in blue and green. Most of these fall to the ground within 1 minute. But the microdroplets, shown in red, continue to drift. This simulation uses only microdroplets. 5 minutes later, 10 minutes later, 20 minutes later, the microdroplets are still floating in place.
空気がよどんでいると、つまり空気の流れがないということで、マイクロ飛沫そのものは、落ちたり、違う場所に動くことができませんので、長時間その場所にとどまるっていうことになります。
But there is a way to prevent this stagnation of microdroplets. Opening windows and increasing air circulation is believed to be effective. When you open a window, microdroplets are quickly swept away. They're very small and light, so any airflow will get rid of them.
できればですね、2箇所開けて風の流れを作ってあげるということが大事。それが1時間に1回でもいいから、そういうようなことをやることによって感染のリスクっていうのはかなり下げることができるようになるんじゃないかなというふうに思います。
Yes, that was very interesting and very clear. I mean, it's very, very clever experiment, Dr. Sergis.
Yeah. It's. I think. I mean, these particles are so fine, and the lasers have fine energy. They're like monochromatic. They have one single wavelength, and they're a bit like, basically, it's the same phenomenon that we use in tills. You know, when you go to supermarkets and the lasers decode the particular. That's right. The barcode. So it's the same kind. But obviously, they're very dangerous if you look at them directly. They can damage the retina of the eye. But because they're very fine beams, they're very fine focus. So you can focus these lasers onto very fine particles. And then using special cameras, you can magnify them. Yeah.
Amazing. It's really very interesting. Okay, before we finish, can you please summarize what we can do to avoid being infected till vaccine is available?
Okay, what's important is that obviously social distancing at least 1 meter apart. We need to wear masks everywhere we go outside, buses, in shops, obviously wear masks. And obviously we have to keep to the actual, the maximum number of people which are allowed to meet outside will be 6 people. And obviously people in a house cannot mix with other householders. So we've got to have our own bubble and not allow other people to go into one's household. And like I said, the maximum number of people are allowed to associate. Again, keeping at least 1 meter away are 6 people. We've got to keep to those guidelines that the government has stated. That's important. And obviously, wash your hands thoroughly. And the other thing is also that was found that the virus can stay in your skin for up to 9 hours. A normal flu virus, 1.5 hours, roughly about 1.8 hours, 1.5 hours. But the virus that causes COVID-19 can stay on your skin for 9 hours. So therefore, it's important to wash your skin thoroughly. Spend good time washing your skin with soap, or if you haven't got soap, use a sanitizer, which has ethanol in it, and it kills the COVID-19 virus. So yeah, and the other thing is also the virus can stay on surfaces for 28 days. That's amazing, for up to a month. Recently discovered that the COVID-19 virus can stay on surfaces for 28 days, but on the skin for 9 hours, whereas a normal flu virus can stay on the skin for something like about 1.1. So about 1.1 minutes, or 1.5. Oh, sorry, 1.1 hours. But the COVID-19 virus up to 9 hours. So obviously it's important to wash your hands thoroughly.
Yes. And Dr. Sergis, going back to what you said about not socializing indoors, no more than 6 people.
Yes.
I know, I'm aware that recently we are going to the second national lockdown, but what about the rest? It's a bit confusing. People are confused and they say, okay, we can't go to someone's house, but how comes we can go to restaurants? I know we do wear the mask, but not as soon as we sit down, we don't wear the mask. So how can you explain this? Is it any logical explanation?
Very equivocal, very ambiguous. So the reason being is because when you go to a restaurant, the way they arrange the seats now, the tables, they're quite at least a meter or longer further apart. So what they do is they make sure that the people that, when they enter because the greatest risk is when they enter the restaurant. Because when they enter the restaurant, that's when they talk to the waitress, etc. And it's important to wear a mask when you enter any restaurant or a cafe. Now, after they're seated, then because the waitress or the waiter has to obviously follow the customer, so there is a bit of a risk there in terms of the distancing. So that's why they have to wear a mask. But after they sat on the table, then the waitress or the waiter can actually have a reasonable distance away from the customer. So therefore, for that reason, they're allowed to take it off. But like I said, it is ambiguous and it's not, it's not perfect system.
Yes, I fully understand. Thank you so much for your valuable information, Dr. Sergis. We do hope to have you again soon to keep us posted with any latest news.
Thank you for having me.
Pleasure. Have a good evening.
Thank you.